Everybody, it's Thursday, January 10th, 2013, and this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium, take 3. Okay, twice now I've gotten almost all the way to the end of my comments, and YouTube says, oh, video upload failed, video aborted, so I'm trying one more time, and if it doesn't take, we may not have a news and views this week. All right. Anyway, you can tell I'm grinning and smiling. It's my favorite kind of weather today. It's gloomy, overcast, and drizzly. So no more depressing sunshine. I'm in a very good mood because it's just bad weather, and I love bad weather. But anyway, for those of you asking about Covert Wars and when it's going to get to Amazon, I have no idea. But I can tell you, having been at Adventures Unlimited headquarters, stayed some time there and seen how they operate, usually if they have a book that already has a heavy demand, a backlog of back orders, as soon as their truck comes, they'll put on a couple of pallets on the truck to the distributor right away. And it takes a certain amount of time for the distributor to get their pallets onto Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the other private bookstores around the country. So be patient, folks. It shouldn't be that much longer, but if you are tired of waiting, you can, of course, order the book directly from Adventures Unlimited, and they will get it to you pronto. All right, we have a members vid chat tomorrow night on Friday night, the 11th, and I've already got questions. Which is kind of unusual because normally I get questions a day or two ahead of time. I've been getting these questions now all week. So I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, transhumanism is back in the news, folks, and I want to talk about this article and comment about an implicit assumption that is contained in not only the article, but it's the implicit assumption underwriting transhumanism per se. And there's also an implicit assumption in the alchemical analysis that Dr. DeHart and I use, because in our opinion, transhumanism is alchemy. It's about the transformation and technological extension of humanity. All right. So I want to refer you to this article. It's called U.S. Spy Agency Predicts a Very Transhuman Future by 2030. It's by George Dvorsky. And let me read this to you, and I apologize. My comments in take 2 of the video were much better, but it's very frustrating when YouTube just dies on you, and it doesn't even have a capture mechanism for what you did record. So anyway, hopefully we'll make it this time. Anyway, the article says this, quote, "The National Intelligence Council has just released its much-anticipated forecasting report, a 140-page document that outlines major trends and technological developments we should expect in the next 20 years. Among their many predictions, the NIC foresees the end of U.S. global dominance. I, for one, don't think that would be such a bad thing, given the way the USA has used that dominance in the last 20 years, if not longer. The rising power of individuals against states, a growing middle class that will increasingly challenge governments, and ongoing shortages in food, water, and energy. But they also envision a future in which humans have been significantly modified by their technologies, what will herald the dawn of the transhuman era." Unquote. Now let me stop right there and note for you something very significant, and we'll return to this point in a moment. The first is that transhumanism as a phenomenon is now so widespread that the powers that be, their think tanks, their foundations, they've taken notice of it, and now they're trying to get out ahead of it, because they're spelling out what really to them is the problem. It might be on its good side, on its positive side, a phenomenon that challenges their power, which thus far has rested in their ability to mask themselves behind the agencies of the nation state, all right? And thus far, they've been rather successful in doing that. The new technologies are, in one sense, very liberating, but as we're going to see, in another sense, they bind you more totally to the system itself and to the potential for those powers that be to manipulate the phenomenon. Now, let me continue in that vein. In the new report, the NIC describes how implants, prosthetics, and powered exoskeletons will become regular features of human life, what could result in substantial improvements to innate human capacities. By 2030, the authors predict prosthetics should reach the point where they're just as good or even better than organic limbs. Stop right there, because the implicit thing that they're saying there is that you could get to the point where the natural human body is not good enough, and therefore, depending on your ability to afford it, you might end up like that strange creature in the second episode of Star Wars, or pardon me, the third episode of Star Wars, that's nothing but a mechanical suit with a brain and a heart on the inside. All right, that's a vision of the possibility if you extend the logic of what they've just said. So in other words, transhumanism, this is touching directly upon that implicit assumption. Transhumanism is extending human capacity beyond the boundaries of its natural body, beyond its natural sensory boundaries. And we'll see that in a moment here, because this article says something very significant and very interesting that touches directly on that implicit assumption. By this stage, the military will increasingly rely on exoskeletons to help soldiers carry heavy loads. Servicemen will be administered psychostimulants to help them remain active for longer periods. Now, unquote. And this is where I think we're going to see the transhuman agenda become a fixture of modern life. The reason is very simple. As I've blogged many times on this site, as I've talked about here on these vid chats, or pardon me, on these news and views from the Nefarium, when the military gets involved, this means that they have seen in these technologies the ability to act as force multipliers to enhance the efficiency of the individual soldier, sailor, or pilot. All right. That means now that there will have to be a military response from non-Western, non-American military powers. You're going to see these types of responses from the French, the British, the Germans, the Italians, the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese. Anybody with a technological, economic, and military geopolitical stake is now going to have to jump on the transhumanist bandwagon, and that in turn is going to drive the transhumanist agenda. In other words, we're already in the transhuman world. We're not seeing the public effect of it, but it's just beginning, and it has already begun. And when the military is involved, then that means what we have is a culture changer. Now let me continue here. Quote, brain implants will allow for advanced neural interface devices, what will bridge the gap between mind and machines. These technologies will allow for brain-controlled prosthetics, some of which may be able to provide superhuman abilities like enhanced strength, speed, and completely new functionality altogether. Other modifications will include retinal eye implants to enable night vision, and listen to this very carefully, other previously inaccessible light spectrums. Now stop right there, because that drives directly again to this implicit assumption. What transhumanism is doing is extending normal human capability by technological means. In other words, with a proper implant, you might be able to see into the infrared, possibly even the microwave frequency range, see things that right now you wouldn't be able to see, or the ultraviolet. So in other words, transhumanism, this is the bottom line. Transhumanism has an implicit assumption, and it's also the implicit assumption of alchemy. And this is going to change in a major way, friends. I can't tell you how significant this change is going to be. Here's why. The implicit assumption of alchemy, and therefore of transhumanism, is that human nature itself is an open system. It's not this closed, self-contained, once-defined for all time system or mechanism or organism. It's something that's dynamic. And in fact, the theory of evolution tried to tell us this, all right? But transhumanism is now going to bring it to our attention in ways that will be very visible because it will be happening right before our eyes and within our time span, the time span of our life. And that lifespan, too, is going to change. It will probably grow longer, much longer for some people, all right? So in other words, this is the implicit assumption, the dynamic changeability, so to speak, the open-ended system nature of humanity itself that is capable of plugging into other systems. Now, why is that so significant? You may say, well, so what? That's obvious. Well, it's not so obvious, my friends, when you go back and consider that one of the pillar foundations of Western culture occurred during the Middle Ages when you wedded theology, the theological system of the medieval Latin Church, to the philosophical system of Aristotle. And in Aristotle's system, nature, any nature, is more or less a closed-off thing. It's a more or less static phenomenon that has no real ability, although he certainly tried to build it in with his idea of entelechy and potentials and so on and so forth. But basically, there was kind of an implicit subtext in that philosophical system, and therefore in our cultural assumptions, that a given nature, and in this case human nature, was an immutable, static sort of thing. Once it was in play, it never would change. Transhumanism is suggesting the exact opposite. Now, I'm one of those that thinks there is an immutability to human nature. There's some core thing that doesn't change. Now, the question is going to be, are we mature enough as these technologies are coming down the line to have the discussion about what that is? Do we really want all these modifications? Are we going to lose our humanity? Is it really going to enhance our humanity? These are all significant questions, and they're now touching upon it. Now, I'm going to make a little prediction here about what this means for the future. This means that you're going to find the powers that be become increasingly concerned in a very public way about things like religion and spirituality. All right? They are now going to try and leap ahead of that game. They're going to try to control that debate for their own purposes. So watch for that to come down the pipe, folks. And that will do it. I think I made it through this take of News and Views from the Nefarium, everybody. Thank you all again for the well wishes, and we'll see you on the flip side, everyone. God bless.